Hi everyone, this is the second lecture of week 5. And again, you can listen to this as an audio if you want. And also please read Genesis 25 before you listen to this lecture. So by Genesis 25, after securing a wife for Isaac, which we talked about in the preceding lecture, Abraham also now dies. He dies at 175. And we also find out in Genesis 25 that Abraham had a third wife, Keturah, from whom we find out is descended another set of very important ancient tribes, most notably Midian. And Midian will reemerge as an important tribe in the book of Exodus. We are also told at Genesis 25 verse 9 that Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury their father in the Machpelah, and this hints that maybe there was some kind of family reconciliation. Okay. And after Abraham's death, in the rest of 25, we quickly move from Abraham's story to the story of Isaac. Okay. However, you don't get much of a story about Isaac at all, because as soon as you hit Isaac, you also then go to the story about his children, Esau and Jacob. Okay, so really we have very few stories on Isaac, namely his birth, his weaning, that is, and of course the Akedah, his sacrifice, and then the story about getting a wife for Isaac, where he kind of features but not really. We just don't have that many stories on Isaac, especially in comparison to Abraham and Jacob. Okay, and again, we're not sure why. Some scholars do wonder if maybe the Abraham and Isaac stories were mixed up or were exchanged when they were told orally, and some have argued that a lot of the stories in the Hebrew text have oral origins and markers of orality. So maybe, you know, you're telling these stories by your ancestors. Sometimes the one story will feature Abraham. Sometimes maybe, you know, the same story will feature Isaac. And maybe that's why we have so little or so few stories on Isaac. Not sure. Okay. Rather, it is Jacob, Isaac's son, whose name will be changed to Israel, who, like Abraham, will have, you know, most of the stories about him in the book of Genesis. Okay. And Jacob's story begins almost on the heels of being told that Abraham has died, you know, so you get the skipping of Isaac for some reason. Okay, so in Genesis 25:19 and following, we are told about Jacob's birth. Okay, so verse 19. 25:19. These are the sons of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. And this is the NRSV translation. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore him. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he was very fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Rebekah, we are told, like Sarah before her, has difficulties conceiving. Okay. And as I stated in a previous video, lots of women in the Hebrew text will have troubles getting pregnant. Okay. Why? In part because, of course, infertility signified that the child that would be born was special, because God had to do something unusual, right, to allow this woman to bear a child. Okay. Rebecca's infertility, however, unlike that of Sarah, where you had, you know, a couple of chapters on Sarah's infertility, is quickly resolved. Okay, and as soon as Isaac prays for her, Rebekah conceives. Okay. However, this unusually quick resolution does not mean, of course, that she has an easy pregnancy. Rather, the narrative quickly moves to another problem, the tumult caused by her unborn, though surprisingly belligerent children. We are told her sons are aggressively fighting. And really the NRSV doesn't quite capture what's going on. The Hebrew word used here is dashing each other, crushing each other, oppressing each other. Okay, so they are aggressively warring with each other inside Rebecca's womb, which can't be comfortable. Okay. That Rebecca's pregnancy is distressingly painful is evident in her statement in Genesis 25 verse 22, which in Hebrew states, and this is literally what the Hebrew says, if thus, why this me? I mean, it's barely coherent. Okay, and it's usually translated as it is in the NRSV, you know, if it be this way, why do I love? Notice how much work the translator is doing. Okay. But here again, there's a kind of disservice done by smoothing out the Hebrew, right? Rebecca's incoherent statement seems to really show, bespeaks her pain, right? She's in so much pain. Why? Because her children are trying to probably kill each other inside the womb, that she can barely talk. Okay. Rebecca, instead of suffering in silence, like all good women or female characters in Genesis before her, takes matters into her own hand by seeking an oracle from God. Notice again the activity of the female characters in the Bible, a feature that we see, you know, from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. Okay. When she goes to seek an oracle, she is told that her difficult pregnancy is the result of twins. Okay, twins who are apparently so competitive and bellicose that they cannot even share the same womb without fighting. The oracle explains further that their aggression has larger kind of international significance, as these children who will be born, these twins, will become founders of two different competing nations. Okay. And this is explained in the oracle in verse 23. Okay. Now, this oracle in verse 23, 25, 23 is usually translated, again, there's a kind of smoothing out and kind of, I guess, downplaying of the ambiguity of the biblical text with the translation. So it's usually translated as, oh, the elder shall serve the younger. And therefore, you know, as kind of foretelling how Jacob, the younger twin, will be greater than Esau, his slightly older brother. However, this is not quite right, okay? Good oracles were usually not so straightforward. Why? Because if you were straightforward, if you were clear, it's, you know, the chances of it not coming to pass were greater. Rather, oracles were deliberately ambiguous, okay? And for example, there's a famous example of this. There's a famous Delphic oracle where the person tells this wealthy ruler that if he crosses the river to battle the Persians, a great empire will fall. And of course, that ruler thinks that the other side will fall, when the oracle really was talking about their own kingdom. Okay, so notice the ambiguity of that oracle, for example. Okay. Similarly, the oracle in Genesis 25 is much more cryptic than the translators have made it to be. Okay. Because of the way that Hebrew works, and you know, as you get further into Hebrew, you are able to see, I think, the kind of elusiveness of the language a bit more. Because of the way that Hebrew works, the oracle in this verse can either be translated as either stating that the greater or bigger will serve the lesser or smaller. So one reading, the greater or bigger will serve the lesser or smaller. However, see, it's not clear. It can also be, it would be a perfectly fine translation to also translate it as the opposite. The lesser or smaller will serve the greater or bigger. Both of these translations are possible. Okay. In short, the oracle in the Hebrew is unclear both to the identity of the brothers, who is the lesser, who is the greater, and also about which one, the greater or lesser, which one of them will serve whom. Okay? Like all good oracles, this oracle therefore leaves the interpretation of it to the reader, and also the fates of the brothers, not to divine destiny, right, but to their own choices, decisions, and actions. The twins themselves are supposed to work out through the story, right, and through their actions, who will be greater and who will be lesser and who will serve whom. The ambiguity of the oracle, moreover, alludes to the problem caused by twins. Now, twins in the ancient world were deemed special, auspicious, abnormal. Okay, why? Because what should be one was two. Okay. The practical problem with twins in the ancient world, however, was that, of course, they confused who was the heir, the identity of the heir. Practically speaking, because twins were born at nearly the same time, to the same parent. Okay, not much distinguish the firstborn heir from the second-born non-heir. Okay, and one way that the ancients made sense of this, right, confusion caused by twins, was by depicting twins as rivals. And the most famous twin rival story, of course, is the story of Romulus, the mythic founder of Rome, and his antagonistic relationship that he has with Remus, his twin. But there's lots of twin stories, actually. And most cultures have a kind of famous twin founder story. Okay, I'm working on a thing on twins. Okay, anyways. In the case of Esau and Jacob, the rivalry is heightened because of the Abrahamic promise. Not only will one of the brothers inherit double the possessions of their father, which is due to the firstborn, okay, and carrying on the father's lineage, but they will also be, one of them will also become the bearer of the Abrahamic promise, become chosen or elect by God. Okay? And considering this rather competitive setup, it is no wonder that Jacob and Esau are already depicted as fighting in the womb. Indeed, their struggle to be prominent, to be the prominent firstborn child, is evident by the way in which the twins exit the womb. We are told that Jacob emerges shortly after Esau, grasping his brother's heel. Okay. And the wordplay in Hebrew, again, a lot is lost in the English translation. The wordplay in Hebrew elucidates and playfully brings out the rivalry. The word for heel in Hebrew, akev, sounds a lot like Jacob's name, Yaakov. Moreover, in Genesis 25, verses 24 through 25, okay, it describes Esau as red and hairy, which is a rather strange description, excuse me. Until we realize, again, there's lots of punning at work here, right? Until we realize that this description of his redness, admoni, right, and his hairiness, sa'ar, puns with Edom, the country founded by Esau. Edom, admoni. Notice how Edom means the red country, right? Notice this relationship to the word Adam, from the soil or from the red soil. Okay, and Edom, one of the main areas in Edom will be Sa'ir. Okay, and notice how similar Sa'ir sounds to the word for hairy, to be hairy, Sa'ar. Okay, so there's lots of punning, and what the narrative makes clear through the wordplay is, of course, that Esau is not just Esau, right, but a cipher for Edom, Israel's rival nation, just as, you know, Jacob is not just Jacob, but really a symbol of Israel. Okay. Adding to the contrast, when the twins grow up, Esau is set to be an outdoorsy hunter, a quote, man of the field in verse 27, who is favored by his meat-loving father. Okay. He is kind of, you know, as best as I can make it, kind of like your jock, everyman, man's man kind of a character, and maybe this is why his father favors him. Okay. His brother, Jacob, in contrast, is, and it's a very strange description, quiet man living in tents, and we don't know what to do with this living in tents part, right? If you look up rabbinic midrash and exegesis, you know, they kind of take this description of living in tents and they turn Jacob into a kind of Torah scholar. Very cute pictures of little, you know, Jacob with a Torah scroll. Anyways, but we don't know what this means. And we are also told that in contrast to Esau, notice the binarisms, right? Jacob is beloved of his mother. And again, there's a question, why does his mother love Jacob and why does his father love Esau, right? Why the contrasting favoritism? Mm-hmm. Jacob, we will see, is also, there's another kind of binarism at work that will really bring out the rivalry. Jacob, in comparison to Esau, is much more clever. Okay, and Jacob's cleverness and Esau's dullness, right, is emphasized in two different narratives about how Jacob either trades or takes or thieves. First, the birthright, and later the blessing that is meant for Esau. And we're going to discuss the first story, the trading of the birthright, here, and in the next video, we're going to talk about the theft of the blessing. Okay. So Jacob and Esau, as the narrative keeps reminding you, are rivals, both for family prominence, also as well, but also for the Abrahamic promise. Okay, and unlike Esau, Jacob is depicted as keenly desirous, very ambitious, right? Keenly desirous to win all these contests. Okay, and his ambition is evident in what happens in Genesis 25, verses 29 through 34. Okay, once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, ha'adom, ha'adom, okay, for I am famished." Therefore, he was called Edom. And Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is my birthright to me?" Okay. Jacob said, "No, no, no, swear to me first, or swear to me today." Okay. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil soup, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. The English, again, doesn't quite capture the nuances of the scene, which is evident in the Hebrew, right? We're told that Esau comes back hungry from the field, famished, right? Sees Jacob cooking a red stew, okay? And asks if he can have this, ha'adom, this red stuff, okay? Esau, notice the way that Esau is depicted. He's almost nonverbal, okay? He doesn't even know what to call this stuff. Just give me that stuff, okay? Again, not the brightest bulb in the room, okay? To this request, Jacob rather uncharitably asked his brother to exchange the stew for the birthright, okay, which is a ludicrous request, considering that the birthright entails double the inheritance. Okay, yet to this unfair exchange, Esau quickly agrees. Again, displaying his foolishness, maybe his lack of long-term planning, and certainly, of course, this hints very strongly that he is not worthy to become the bearer of the Abrahamic promise. Okay? But again, it's not just Esau, right? Notice how Jacob too is portrayed rather negatively, right? He is unbrotherly, calculating, ruthlessly ambitious, right? He refuses to give his brothers food until he gives away most of his inheritance. The amazing thing about this literature was how unafraid the biblical authors were, right? Writers, authors who claim descent from Jacob, right? How unafraid they were in kind of portraying their ancestors and therefore themselves, because, these stories about your ancestors really about themselves in less than ideal light, okay? And as we will see, this is only the first of Jacob's egregious actions, okay? And he will do another thing that so angers Esau that Jacob would now be forced to leave home. And for that, turn to the next video.